Nathaniel Brooks, a 40-year-old CEO in Washington, D.C.'s elite social circle, had built impenetrable walls around his heart after a devastating betrayal years ago. His imposing 6'2" frame and precisely tailored Armani suits created a physical barrier as effective as his emotional one. At the Kennedy Center's annual Symphony Gala, an event he attended only to maintain necessary social connections, he stood alone near a towering marble column, observing the Capitol's power players with detached amusement. The grand hall sparkled with crystalline chandeliers and the jewelry of Washington's elite. A carefully choreographed display of wealth and influence that Nathaniel had long ago learned to navigate with practiced indifference. Senators mingled with Supreme Court justices, while ambassadors exchanged pleasantries with tech moguls, all performing the intricate dance of Capitol society with precision born of necessity rather than pleasure. Another successful quarter, Nathaniel, Senator Harrison approached with a congratulatory handshake. "Your innovation initiative has the committee quite impressed. The team deserves the credit," Nathaniel replied automatically, his response as polished as his cufflinks. These exchanges had become so routine that he could predict each conversational turn before it occurred. As the National Symphony Orchestra transitioned from Tchaikovsky to Debussy, something inexplicable drew his attention across the grand hall. There, illuminated by the warm glow of vintage sconces, stood a woman whose presence seemed to command the very light in the room. Her floor-length gown of deep sapphire silk complemented her rich brown skin, and her natural hair was styled in an elaborate updo, adorned with tiny crystal pins that caught the light when she moved. But it was her smile, genuine and luminous amid the practiced social expressions surrounding her, that truly captured his attention. "That's Lila Morgan," murmured Ambassador Isabella Reed beside him, following his gaze. "Recently returned from humanitarian work overseas. Georgetown and Howard, educated with a doctorate in international relations. Quite remarkable, they say." Nathaniel nodded without comment but found himself gravitating toward Lila throughout the evening, their paths circling closer through the crowd until they finally converged near a quiet corridor leading to a private exhibition of historical musical instruments. "You've been watching me all evening, Mr. Brooks," she said without preamble, her voice carrying subtle musical inflections that suggested time spent in multiple countries. "I'm curious why." The directness startled him into honesty. "Because you're the only person here who seems genuinely happy to be here." Her laugh, warm and unrestrained, created an immediate intimacy between them. What a refreshingly honest answer. "I'm only happy because I've just returned to D.C. after 5 years away, and everything feels new again. Even these stuffy galas." She gestured toward the main hall with a graceful movement of her hand, adorned with a single platinum band, set with a modest opal. "5 years is a significant absence," Nathaniel commented, surprised by his desire to extend their conversation. "What brought you back to Washington?" "A promise to myself," she answered, her amber eyes holding his with unexpected directness, "to finally plant roots somewhere that matters to me." Their conversation flowed effortlessly from there, skipping the superficial exchanges that dominated Washington gatherings. Lila spoke of teaching literacy in rural Senegal, coordinating medical supplies in Guatemala, and documenting oral histories in Cambodia. Nathaniel found himself sharing stories of his grandfather's influence on his career path, his passion for architectural restoration, and his private collection of rare botanical specimens, subjects he rarely discussed with anyone. Hours passed unnoticed until they found themselves among the last remaining guests. The orchestra had long since departed, replaced by recorded classical music that echoed through the increasingly empty hall. "I should find my driver," Lila said, though she made no move to leave. "Or you could see the city lights from my terrace," Nathaniel suggested, the invitation surprising him as much as her. "Georgetown offers an unparalleled view of the Potomac at night." The hesitation in her eyes lasted only a moment before she nodded. "I'd like that. I've missed D.C.'s nightscape." His private car carried them through the Capitol streets, the driver discreetly silent as they continued their conversation in the intimate back seat. Nathaniel found himself entranced by the animated way Lila spoke with her hands, the thoughtful pauses she took before answering complex questions, and the genuine curiosity with which she approached every topic. His Georgetown penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a historic building, its restoration a personal project he'd overseen with meticulous attention. As they stepped from the private elevator, Lila's eyes widened at the space before her. High ceilings with original crown molding, walnut floors warming the contemporary furnishings, and walls of glass offering panoramic views of the Capitol. "This is beautiful," she said, Moving toward the terrace doors, "You have excellent taste. I prefer spaces with history," he replied, opening the doors to the expansive terrace garden, things that have stood the test of time. Under a canopy of stars, with the Potomac River reflecting city lights below them, Lila's expression turned contemplative. The night air carried the scent of cherry blossoms from nearby trees, mingling with the jasmine notes of her perfume as she stood beside him at the glass balustrade. "I've spent years collecting moments around the world," she confessed, standing close enough that he could see the faint freckles across her nose, previously hidden by the dimmer light indoors. "Beautiful sunsets in Santorini, monsoon rains in Mumbai, desert stars in Morocco, but I rarely shared them with anyone who truly saw me." Her eyes met his with unexpected vulnerability, until tonight, when Nathaniel reached to brush a fallen crystal pin from her shoulder. The brief contact sent electricity through them both. His fingers lingered against the warm skin of her collarbone, and he watched as her pulse quickened visibly at the base of her throat. "Lila," he began, uncertain what he intended to say. She silenced him by placing her fingertips gently against his lips. "Don't overthink this," she whispered. "Just feel it." Their first kiss began tentatively, a gentle exploration that quickly deepened into something primal and consuming. His hands cradled her face with unexpected tenderness, while hers gripped his shoulders as though anchoring herself against some internal storm. The taste of champagne lingered on her lips, intoxicating him far more effectively than the alcohol itself ever could. They moved inside without breaking contact, navigating through the dimly lit penthouse with instinctive coordination. Pausing occasionally, when sensation overwhelmed purpose, against the living room wall, Nathaniel's hands traced the contours of her body through silk, discovering the curves concealed by her formal gown. Lila's fingers worked at his bow tie and shirt buttons, her usual composure replaced by urgent desire. In his bedroom, with moonlight spilling across imported Egyptian cotton sheets, they discovered each other with reverent intensity. Nathaniel traced the elegant curve of her spine, memorizing every reaction as though solving a precious mystery. The small birthmark below her left shoulder blade, the ticklish spot along her ribs, the way her breath caught when he kissed the sensitive skin behind her ear, all catalogued with devoted attention. Lila explored him with equal focus, her fingers mapping the defined muscles of his chest and shoulders, her lips trailing along the sharp line of his jaw. When she discovered the faint scar near his hip, a remnant of a childhood sailing accident, she traced it with such tender curiosity that Nathaniel felt an emotional intimacy far more disarming than the physical. When they finally joined, the connection transcended physical pleasure, creating moments of vulnerability that terrified and exhilarated him simultaneously. Lila's eyes held his throughout, refusing to allow him the emotional distance he typically maintained. Even in his most intimate encounters, this wasn't just bodies finding release. It was something deeper that neither had anticipated. "Stay," Lila whispered hours later, as exhaustion finally claimed them, her head resting in the crook of his shoulder, one leg draped possessively across his. For a moment, Nathaniel considered the possibility, his arm tightening around her waist while something long dormant unfurled within him. They drifted to sleep entwined, the city lights casting gentle shadows across their forms. But as dawn painted his bedroom with golden light, old fears resurfaced in Nathaniel's consciousness. The peaceful vulnerability of Lila's sleeping face triggered memories of another woman who had wielded his trust as a weapon against him. Carefully extracting himself from their embrace, he dressed silently, watching her sleep with a mixture of longing and resolution. Her hair had come loose during the night, dark waves spreading across his pillow in stark contrast to the white linen. One hand rested where his body had been, as though seeking his warmth even in sleep. Before leaving, he broke his pattern of clean departures by visiting his private greenhouse, adjacent to the terrace. There, surrounded by rare specimens collected from around the world, he cut a single white gardenia, its complex fragrance reminiscent of their night together. Returning to the bedroom, he placed the bloom on the pillow beside her, a gesture of regret for a possibility he couldn't allow himself to explore. With one last look at the woman who had somehow breached his defenses in a single evening, Nathaniel stepped into the elevator, already reconstructing the walls around his heart as he descended to the waiting world below. Chapter 2. The Meeting. 3 months passed with Nathaniel immersing himself in work and carefully orchestrated distractions. Board meetings, charity functions, and international conferences filled his calendar with relentless efficiency, leaving no space for reflection on that singular night. Yet at every social gathering, his eyes invariably searched for Lila, both dreading and hoping for her appearance. The disappointment when she wasn't present surprised him with its intensity. The gardenia plant in his penthouse greenhouse received obsessive attention, as though nurturing it maintained some tenuous connection to their shared night. He'd never been particularly skilled with flowering plants, preferring the architectural precision of succulents and palms. But this particular specimen flourished under his unexpected care. On a brilliant June afternoon, Nathaniel stood in the meticulously manicured gardens of the historic Meridian House, adjusting his silver silk tie as his best friend, Marcus Tate, prepared to marry his longtime love, Zara Phillips. As best man, Nathaniel had orchestrated a flawless rehearsal dinner the previous evening and ensured every detail of the wedding day would proceed with military precision, just as he managed all aspects of his life. "You seem distracted," Marcus observed as they waited in the groom's suite, the sounds of arriving guests filtering through leaded glass windows. "Not having second thoughts about your toast, are you?" Nathaniel smiled, the expression genuine for his oldest friend. "The toast is perfect, as is everything else. Just some work matters on my mind." Marcus adjusted his cufflinks, antique silver pieces that had belonged to his grandfather, a civil rights attorney who had argued before the Supreme Court. "After 15 years of friendship, I'd hoped you might trust me with the truth." His dark eyes held Nathaniel's with knowing patience. Before Nathaniel could formulate a deflection, Marcus's younger brother, Caleb, burst into the room with the photographer in tow. "Places, gentlemen. Zara's car just arrived, and we're on a schedule tighter than my college budget." The ceremony setting was picturesque. Centuries. Old oak trees created a natural cathedral over the rose garden, with white chairs arranged in graceful arcs facing an elegant floral arch. Nathaniel took his position beside Marcus at the altar, nodding respectfully to Zara's father, retired Admiral Phillips, in the front row. The string quartet began the processional, Pachelbel's cannon floating through the warm afternoon. Zara's bridesmaids proceeded one by one down the rose-petal-strewn aisle, each wearing a different design in the same shade of sapphire blue, a thoughtful accommodation of Zara's diverse group of friends. The music shifted subtly to announce the maid of honor, and Nathaniel's practiced composure shattered as Lila appeared at the garden entrance. The sapphire silk of her dress, the exact shade he'd first seen her wearing, highlighted the rich undertones of her skin. Her hair, now styled in an elegant updo adorned with small white flowers that resembled his gardenia, caught the light. Her eyes, scanning the gathering, found his with inevitable precision. The almost imperceptible falter in her step told him she hadn't known of his connection to the groom either. Throughout the ceremony, he felt her presence like a physical force, though she stood opposite him with perfect poise, betraying no hint of their shared history to the assembled guests. During the ritual candle lighting, where best man and maid of honor participated together, their hands brushed as they both reached for the same taper. A visible current passed between them, causing Lila's hand to tremble slightly as she withdrew. Several guests exchanged knowing glances, mistaking their obvious tension for new attraction rather than complicated history. At the reception, beneath a spectacular white tent on the property's east lawn, Lila maintained elegant distance, engaging warmly with other guests, while executing a masterful dance of always being elsewhere whenever he approached. Her laugh carried across the space occasionally, drawing his attention regardless of his conversational partners. "Your best man's speech was surprisingly moving," noted Supreme Court Justice Evelyn Harper, an old family friend. "I didn't realize you had such poetry in you, Nathaniel." He smiled politely. His attention divided as he watched Lila across the room, helping an elderly guest to a comfortable seat. Marcus inspires the best in everyone. The traditional dance between best man and maid of honor became unavoidable as the evening progressed. Nathaniel felt the eyes of 200 guests upon them as he extended his hand to Lila on the dance floor, the orchestra beginning a slow waltz that seemed designed to prolong their interaction. "You look beautiful," he said quietly as his hand found the small of her back, feeling her stiffen beneath his touch. "Thank you," she replied, her voice controlled, though he could feel the rapid beat of her heart where their bodies connected. "Marcus speaks highly of you. Apparently, you're practically brothers." The subtle emphasis suggested surprise that a man she'd thought she understood could have such deep connections to people she knew. "You're impossible to forget," he whispered, his fingers pressing gently against the silk covering her spine, feeling the warmth of her skin beneath. "I've looked for you at every event since." "Then why did you try?" she interrupted, her composed expression momentarily fracturing to reveal hurt beneath. "Why leave like I meant nothing?" Before he could answer, the music ended, and she stepped away with practiced grace, accepting another partner's hand while leaving Nathaniel standing alone in the center of the dance floor, acutely aware of curious gazes. For the remainder of the evening, he found himself gravitating toward conversations where he could observe her, noting the genuine warmth with which she interacted with everyone, from catering staff to distinguished guests. Unlike most in their social circle, Lila's charm appeared entirely authentic rather than strategically deployed. Later, he found Marcus by the champagne fountain. "You might have warned me about your maid of honor," he said, keeping his tone light despite the turmoil beneath. Marcus's expression grew serious. "Would it have mattered? You'd still have come for me. How do you know her?" "She mentioned travels abroad, but Lila is family in everything but blood," Marcus explained, his expression softening. "Her parents were my mother's dearest friends since their days at Howard. Distinguished diplomats, Ambassador Morgan and Dr. Morgan from the State Department. They died in a plane crash over the Alps when Lila was 19. She was studying at Oxford then." He paused, watching Lila across the room. "She spent years traveling afterward, healing in her own way, recently returned to D.C. permanently to put down roots again." Nathaniel absorbed this information. Pieces of the puzzle that was Lila Morgan falling into place. "She's remarkable," he said simply. "And wounded," Marcus added pointedly, "like someone else I know." He clapped Nathaniel on the shoulder. "Fix your mistakes, brother. Second chances are rare in our world." The reception continued into the night, fairy lights illuminating the garden as guests gradually departed. From the terrace where he'd stepped out for fresh air, Nathaniel watched through the tense transparent panels as Lila charmed Zara's grandmother, her head thrown back in genuine laughter at something the elderly woman said. The sound carried faintly through the evening air, calling to something long dormant within him. Rain began to fall lightly, fat drops creating ripples in the reflecting pool before him. For the first time since his engagement had imploded years ago, Nathaniel Brooks contemplated the terrifying possibility that he had walked away from something irreplaceable, not just a beautiful night, but a woman whose very existence challenged the carefully constructed walls around his heart. Chapter 3. The Challenge. "This is manipulation, plain and simple," Nathaniel complained 2 weeks later, as Marcus's vintage Aston Martin sped toward the Chesapeake Bay, magnificent waterfront estates visible through breaks in the lush green landscape, flanking the coastal highway. Marcus merely grinned, unrepentant. "Consider it an intervention," his friend replied, expertly navigating a curve. "Zara and I are tired of watching you two circle each other like wounded animals." The tension at our post-wedding brunch was unbearable. Nathaniel stared out the window, unwilling to validate Marcus's assessment. The morning after the wedding, at a private brunch for the wedding party and close family, he and Lila had maintained careful distance, speaking to everyone except each other, their awareness of one another palpable despite the deliberate separation. Marcus and Zara's brilliant plan involved a weekend gathering at the historic Brooks family estate, Tidewater Haven, with a carefully selected guest list that guaranteed Nathaniel and Lila would have ample accidental time alone together. The 19th-century mansion overlooking the bay had been his grandfather's pride, its sprawling grounds and private dock, offering distinguished seclusion just 2 hours from D.C. "Tell me again who's coming," Nathaniel requested, though he'd already memorized the list from Marcus's invitation. "Just 6 of us. Zara and me, you, Lila, and the Thompsons. But Caleb called this morning. Apparently, Emma has a terrible summer cold. They send regrets." Nathaniel narrowed his eyes suspiciously. "Convenient, isn't it?" Marcus agreed cheerfully. "And I have a morning fishing trip planned with the harbor master tomorrow, while Zara has a spa appointment in St. Michael's. Such a shame we'll be occupied for most of the day, leaving you and Lila to entertain yourselves." The mansion appeared around the next bend, its white columns and wraparound veranda as impressive as Nathaniel remembered from childhood summers. A newly restored boathouse and dock extended into the bay, where his grandfather's meticulously maintained sailboat bobbed gently in the afternoon light. Lila's expression upon seeing him at the estate entrance confirmed she'd been equally ambushed. She wore casual elegance, white linen pants, and a turquoise blouse that complemented her complexion, her hair in loose natural curls that framed her face. For a moment, recognition of their shared predicament created unexpected complicity between them, a flash of humor crossing her face before she composed herself. "Marcus," she said, arching an elegant eyebrow, "you mentioned other guests." "Did I?" Marcus replied innocently. "The Thompsons send their regrets. Some cold. Very unfortunate." Zara emerged from the house, greeting Lila with a warm embrace. "Isn't this place magnificent? And Nathaniel knows all the best spots. He practically grew up here. I'm sure he wouldn't mind showing you around." The first evening progressed with surprising ease, the 4 of them enjoying dinner on the veranda overlooking the bay at sunset. Marcus had arranged for his family's longtime cook, Esther, to prepare a feast of Chesapeake specialties. crab cakes, oysters, and fresh corn. Accompanied by excellent wine, conversation flowed naturally, carefully skirting any mention of the wedding or how Nathaniel and Lila might have met previously. After dinner, as they moved to the library for digestives, thunder rumbled in the distance. "Storm coming," Marcus noted, examining the darkening horizon. "Forecast said it could be significant. The generator is operational," Nathaniel assured them, "and the house has weathered worse for 2 centuries. By midnight, rain lashed against the windows with impressive force, occasional lightning illuminating the bay's churning waters. Nathaniel found himself alone in the library, nursing a rare scotch while reviewing family photographs that lined the mahogany shelves. His grandfather featured prominently, a formidable figure who had built the Brooks fortune through shipping and later technology investments, all while maintaining this sanctuary on the bay. "Couldn't sleep either?" Lila's voice startled him from contemplation. She stood in the doorway, wrapped in a silk kimono patterned with blue herons, apparently having abandoned attempts at rest. "The storm," he offered as explanation, though in truth, knowing she slept just 2 doors down from his suite had been the primary deterrent to sleep. She moved into the room, examining the photographs with genuine interest. "Your grandfather?" she asked, indicating a formal portrait. "Yes, Winston Brooks. This place was his pride. He taught me to sail in that very bay, to respect the water's power and the wind's unpredictability." Lila studied the image. "You have his eyes, intense." Before he could respond, a tremendous crack of thunder coincided with the house plunging into darkness. The sudden absence of the air conditioning's hum emphasized the storm's ferocity outside. "Stay here," Nathaniel instructed. Finding his way to a drawer where emergency supplies were kept, the beam of a powerful flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating Lila's face. Calm despite the unexpected development, "Generator should engage automatically," he explained, moving toward the library door. "If not, I'll need to check the control panel." "I'll come with you," she stated. Not a question, but a decision. 2 flashlights are better than 1. They navigated the mansion's darkened corridors together, their path occasionally illuminated by lightning flashing through windows. The house's ancient bones creaked and groaned under the storm's assault, creating an atmosphere both intimate and slightly unnerving. The control panel in the mudroom indicated a problem with the generator's automatic switch. "Manual override required," Nathaniel explained, grabbing a rain jacket from a hook. "The unit is in an outbuilding." "Then I'm definitely coming," Lila insisted, selecting a jacket for herself. "I'm not staying alone in a dark, creaking mansion while you battle elements outside." The dash across the rear garden to the generator shed left them both soaked despite the jackets. Inside the small structure, Nathaniel worked quickly to engage the backup power system, Lila holding the flashlight steady without complaint. "You're remarkably calm during a crisis," he observed as they prepared to race back to the house. A smile flashed in the beam of the flashlight. "I've weathered worse than a power outage." "Nathaniel, try coordinating relief supplies during monsoon season in Bangladesh." They ran back through the deluge, laughing as they stumbled onto the covered porch, thoroughly drenched despite their precautions. Inside, emergency lights now illuminated the hallways, though the main power remained offline. "The generator powers essential systems only," Nathaniel explained, as they dripped on the mudroom floor. "Lights, refrigeration, security, some outlets. No air conditioning, I'm afraid." Lila wrung water from her hair, her silk kimono clinging to her form beneath the borrowed jacket. "At least we won't be sitting in complete darkness." She glanced down at her soaked attire. "Though I should change immediately. The linen closet at the top of the stairs has fresh towels," he offered, trying not to notice how the wet silk revealed more than it concealed. 30 minutes later, they reconvened in the library, both in dry clothes. Nathaniel had built a small fire in the fireplace to combat the growing humidity, and located several candles to augment the emergency lighting. The storm continued unabated outside, but within the wood-paneled room, a comfortable atmosphere developed. "Your friends are not particularly subtle," Lila noted, accepting a glass of wine as she curled into a corner of the leather sofa. She'd changed into loose linen pajamas, her damp hair piled atop her head in a casual knot. Nathaniel smiled ruefully, taking a seat opposite her. "Marcus has many virtues, but subtlety has never been among them." "They mean well," she conceded, "though I suspect they've imagined a far more romantic history between us than exists." The statement hung in the air, an opening Nathaniel recognized but hesitated to take. Lightning illuminated the bay through rain-streaked windows, followed by thunder that shook the oldest parts of the house. "Lila," he began, searching for words adequate to the moment. "About that night." "You don't owe me an explanation," she interrupted, though her tone suggested otherwise. We are adults. It was one night. That doesn't make my departure any less cowardly." Her expression softened slightly. "Then why did you leave?" The question held no accusation, only genuine curiosity. Nathaniel considered deflection but found himself unwilling to offer anything less than honesty. "Because I felt something I wasn't prepared for," he admitted. "Something I've worked very hard to avoid for years." "Most people pursue feelings they enjoy," she observed. "Most people haven't had those feelings weaponized against them." The statement emerged more bitterly than intended, creating a momentary silence broken only by rain against the windows and the fire crackling in the grate. "What happened to you, Nathaniel?" she asked softly. Perhaps it was the storm's intimacy, or the unlikelihood of escape from this conversation in the isolated house. But Nathaniel found himself sharing the story he typically kept carefully guarded. He spoke of his former fiancée, Victoria, who had orchestrated their entire relationship with calculating precision. "She studied me first, learned my preferences, my habits, presented herself as the perfect partner. For 18 months, I believed I'd found someone who truly understood me." His voice hardened. "Then, a week before our wedding, I discovered documentation on her computer. Detailed plans for our divorce, including which assets she'd target, which friends she'd cultivate for leverage, even a timeline for the entire process." Lila's expression reflected genuine shock. "That's pathological. That's strategic," he corrected. "At least in certain Washington circles. Her father lost everything in the 2008 crash. Marrying into stability was her family's recovery plan." He stared into his glass. The worst part was realizing that every intimate moment, every seeming vulnerability she'd shared, had been performance art, a means to an end. "So you built walls," Lila concluded, "and I threatened them." His eyes met hers across the space between them. "You demolished them in a single night." It was unsettling. Outside, the storm's intensity began to diminish, the time between lightning and thunder lengthening as it moved across the bay. Inside, a different kind of electricity charged the air between them. "Can I ask you something deeply personal?" Lila requested, setting aside her wine glass. Nathaniel nodded, already having revealed more than he had to anyone besides Marcus. "By closing yourself off," she began, echoing words from their night together. "Haven't you allowed her to steal your future as well as your past? Each time you walk away from connection, isn't she still controlling your choices?" The question landed with unexpected force, challenging assumptions he'd built his life around for years. Before he could formulate a response, the overhead lights suddenly blazed on as power returned to the house. The spell created by firelight and storm-enforced intimacy shattered, harsh reality intruding on their cocoon of confidences. Lila blinked in the sudden brightness, then rose gracefully from the sofa. "It's late. We should probably try to sleep now that the power's back." At the doorway, she paused, looking back at him. "Some dreams should stay dreams, Nathaniel, but others deserve the chance to become reality. The wisdom is knowing which is which." She disappeared down the hallway toward the guest wing, leaving him alone with the dying fire and her unanswered questions still hanging in the air between them. Chapter 4. The Secret. In the 3 weeks following the Chesapeake weekend, Nathaniel found himself thinking of Lila's parting words with increasing frequency. Their conversations during the storm had created a fragile truce, but they'd maintained careful distance for the remainder of the weekend, both unwilling to risk further vulnerability. Back in Washington, he immersed himself in work while surreptitiously gathering information about Lila's activities through casual questions to Marcus and Zara. He learned she'd taken a position with the prestigious Meridian International Development Foundation, resided in a historic Georgetown brownstone once owned by a prominent civil rights attorney, and served on several cultural boards. But these facts offered little insight into the woman herself. On a Tuesday evening in late July, leaving his office uncommonly early, Nathaniel noticed Lila's distinctive figure entering Children's National Hospital. Curiosity overrode propriety. He instructed his driver to wait and followed at a discreet distance. Within the hospital's colorful main lobby, he observed her warm greeting of staff who clearly knew her well, suggesting regular visits rather than a one-time appointment. Instead of taking the main elevators, she disappeared through doors marked Hematology-Oncology. Concern immediately replaced curiosity. Was she ill? The thought created unexpected anxiety that propelled him through the same doors, where he quickly ducked behind a column as a nurse approached Lila with a clipboard. "Our storyteller arrives right on schedule." The nurse smiled. "They've been asking for you all afternoon." "I brought new books," Lila replied, indicating a tote bag emblazoned with the Schaumburg Center logo, including that Dragon series Theo requested. Relieved congruent to you that she appeared to be visiting rather than receiving treatment, Nathaniel continued his unplanned surveillance, following discreetly as Lila was escorted to a brightly decorated room where approximately 10 children of various ages gathered on colorful floor cushions. Some wore hospital gowns, others casual clothes. Several were bald from treatment, while a few were connected to IV poles they'd rotated alongside them. Hidden from view in the hallway, Nathaniel watched through the room's large observation window as Lila seated herself in a rocking chair, her entire demeanor transforming as she engaged with the children. Gone was the poised, sometimes guarded woman he knew, replaced by someone joyfully expressive, using different voices for characters and expansive gestures that had her young audience captivated. She began with a picture book about a purple dragon who couldn't breathe fire, her voice changing dramatically for each character. Deep and gruff for the father dragon. Squeaky and uncertain for the protagonist, the children responded with delight, calling out suggestions for how the little dragon might solve his problem. Nathaniel found himself entranced by this new facet of Lila, uninhibited, playful, and completely present with these vulnerable children. When she finished the first book, a frail boy with a nasal cannula raised his hand. "Miss Lila, can you read the one about the astronaut again? The one where she has to be brave? For you, Theo?" "Absolutely." Lila pulled another book from her bag. This one about a young black girl who dreams of space exploration despite numerous obstacles. As she read, Nathaniel noticed how she emphasized the protagonist's determination rather than her challenges, her voice conveying strength and possibility rather than pity. The message was clear. Difficulties existed, but didn't define you. For nearly an hour, he observed her animated readings, her interactions with each child, demonstrating remarkable attention to their individual needs, adjusting her volume for a girl with hearing aids, describing illustrations carefully for a boy with visual impairment, pausing patiently when a young patient needed to manage nausea without missing the story. As the session concluded and most children returned to their rooms, a small girl with no hair remained behind, clutching Lila's hand with obvious adoration. Her dark skin was ashen from treatment, but her eyes sparkled as she looked up at Lila. "Can I show you my new beads?" the child asked, pointing to a long strand of colorful beads hanging from her IV pole. "Of course, Ava," Lila responded, kneeling to examine what Nathaniel later realized was a bravery bead collection, each bead representing a treatment or procedure the child had endured. "Look at all these new ones. You're the bravest girl I know." "Only because you were brave first," Ava replied, their interaction reflecting a connection deeper than casual volunteering would explain. Nathaniel retreated to the waiting area as Lila emerged from the children's room, following at a distance as she made her way to another wing. There, he witnessed a scene that affected him profoundly. Lila embracing a woman in the hallway outside a patient room, holding her as she sobbed uncontrollably. The transplant didn't take. The woman managed between sobs. "They're saying we need to consider quality of life now, not quantity." "But how do I give up? He's only 5. "You're not giving up," Lila assured her, her voice gentle but firm. "You're loving him completely, in whatever time remains. I'll be here, Sophia, every step." The raw compassion in Lila's face as she supported the stranger through obvious grief brought unexpected tears to Nathaniel's own eyes. This wasn't performative kindness or resume-building volunteerism. This was authentic human connection in the face of unimaginable pain. So absorbed was he in the scene that he failed to notice the approaching nurse until she addressed him directly. "Are you here for a specific patient, sir? This area is typically for family members." Before he could formulate a plausible explanation, Lila looked up, instantly recognizing him. Her expression shifted from surprise to confusion to unmistakable anger. Excusing herself from the grieving mother with a promise to return, she approached Nathaniel with controlled fury. "Outside." Now, she instructed in a tone that brooked no argument, guiding him toward an exit with a firm hand at his elbow. In the hospital's side garden, designed as a peaceful retreat for families and patients, Lila confronted him. "Are you following me?" she demanded, arms crossed defensively. "Because that crosses several boundaries, Nathaniel. Even for someone of your privilege and position." The accusation stung, particularly given his genuine admiration for what he'd witnessed. "It wasn't planned," he admitted. "I saw you entering and was concerned." "Concerned?" she repeated skeptically. "You disappeared into the oncology department," he explained. "I thought perhaps," understanding dawned in her expression, "you thought I was ill." Her anger receded slightly, replaced by weary confusion. "Why would that concern you? We barely know each other." The question deserved honesty. "I'd like to change that," he said simply. Lila studied him with the careful assessment she might give a complex problem, weighing variables before reaching a conclusion. Whatever she saw in his face must have satisfied some internal criteria. As her posture gradually relaxed, "There's a cafe across the street," she said finally. "I could use some tea after my reading session. If you're genuinely interested in conversation rather than surveillance, you're welcome to join me." The small cafe offered intimate privacy, despite its proximity to the hospital. After placing their orders, chamomile tea for Lila, black coffee for Nathaniel, an expectant silence developed between them. "The children clearly adore you," he began, unsure how to navigate this unexpected opportunity. "I started volunteering during college," she explained, warming her hands around the ceramic mug. "Reading was my escape during difficult times. I wanted to offer that same journey to kids who are temporarily confined to hospital beds. You're very good with them." "Natural." A shadow crossed her face, quickly masked. "I understand them," she said simply. Nathaniel sensed deeper meaning behind the words but hesitated to press. Instead, he asked about the mother he'd seen her comforting. "Her daughter received difficult news today," Lila explained. Genuine sadness, evident in her voice, a recurrence they weren't expecting. In that moment, she needed someone who could handle her grief without trying to minimize it or offer empty platitudes. "You speak from experience," he observed quietly. Lila's eyes met his, searching for something, judgment perhaps, or pity. Finding neither, she seemed to make a decision. Slowly, deliberately, she set down her mug and rolled up the sleeve of her silk blouse, revealing a faint but distinct scar on her inner arm near the elbow crease. "Poor placement," she explained, watching his reaction carefully. "For chemotherapy, I was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia when I was 9 years old." The revelation landed with physical force. Nathaniel found himself instinctively reaching across the table, his fingers hovering above the scar before meeting her eyes in silent question. When she nodded, he gently traced the mark with reverent fingers. "This is beautiful to me," he said softly, surprising them both with his rawness, "because it means you survived." Something shifted in Lila's expression, a softening, a barrier lowering. 3 years of treatment," she continued. "I lost my hair twice, missed most of 4th grade, spent more time with nurses than friends." Her smile held both pain and pride. "But I was lucky. I had parents who could take leave from work, good insurance, access to clinical trials." "Is that why you volunteer?" "Giving back?" "Partly," she acknowledged, "but it's also selfish. These children remind me to live fully, to never waste a single day on pettiness or fear." Her gaze became pointed, or on walls built to keep others out. The gentle challenge hung between them as they finished their drinks in companionable silence. When they rose to leave, Nathaniel surprised her with a simple request: "Let me drive you home." Outside her, Georgetown brownstone, a 3-story federal-style home with black shutters and a glossy red door, Nathaniel escorted her to the entrance. Gaslight-style lamps cast a warm glow across the brick sidewalk, creating an intimate bubble around them in the gathering dusk. "Thank you for trusting me with your story," he said, standing close enough to catch the faint scent of jasmine in her hair. "It's not a secret," she replied. "But it's not something I lead with either. It shaped me, but doesn't define me." "It explains your remarkable presence," he observed, "the way you fully inhabit each moment. When you face mortality as a child, you either live in fear or with purpose." She said simply, "I chose purpose." Time seemed suspended as they stood together on her doorstep, neither willing to break the fragile connection that had formed between them. With gentle deliberation, Nathaniel raised his hand to her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone with such tenderness that Lila's eyes fluttered closed at the contact. "Lila," he whispered, her name a question, an answer both. Their kiss was nothing like the passionate urgency of their first night together. This was gentle, almost reverent. A communion rather than conquest. His hands cradled her face as though holding something infinitely precious, while hers rested lightly against his chest, feeling the strong, steady rhythm of his heart beneath fine cotton. When they parted, something fundamental had shifted between them. No longer strangers who had shared one intimate night, nor antagonists carefully circling each other, but two people seeing each other clearly for perhaps the first time. "Good night, Nathaniel," she said softly, extracting her keys. "Dinner tomorrow?" he asked, unwilling to lose the momentum of their newfound understanding. Her smile held promise rather than reservation. "I'd like that." As he walked back to his waiting car, Nathaniel felt lighter than he had in years, as though the weight of practiced cynicism had been temporarily lifted from his shoulders. Behind him, Lila watched from her doorway until he turned the corner, her fingers unconsciously tracing her lips, where the warmth of his kiss lingered like a promise. Chapter 5. The Walls. The weeks following their hospital encounter transformed Nathaniel and Lila's tentative connection into something neither had anticipated. They began with cautious dinners at hidden Georgetown restaurants, where they wouldn't encounter familiar faces from their social circles. Gradually, those dinners extended into long walks along the National Mall at dawn, when the monument stood peaceful and unmarred by tourist crowds, and lingering conversations on Lila's brick patio beneath strings of fairy lights and a canopy of ivy. Nathaniel found himself sharing thoughts he'd never vocalized. His complicated relationship with his late father, his private passion for architectural restoration, his dream of one day designing sustainable homes for communities in need. Lila listened with genuine interest, asking questions that pushed beyond surface answers to the motivations beneath. In turn, she revealed her work developing education initiatives for refugee children, her collection of first-edition poetry books, and her secret talent for jazz piano, inherited from her musician grandmother. Yet despite their growing intimacy, Nathaniel maintained subtle barriers, arriving precisely on time for their dates, but never early, ending evenings with increasingly passionate kisses, but always returning to his own home, referring to their relationship in deliberately casual terms. When Marcus inquired, Lila noticed these patterns but chose patience over confrontation, understanding that walls built over years couldn't be dismantled in weeks. On a perfect late August evening, Marcus offered Nathaniel the use of his family's vintage wooden sailboat, a meticulously maintained 36-foot ketch with gleaming teak decks and cream sails. "Take her out on the Potomac overnight," Marcus suggested with characteristic directness. "She's fully stocked, including excellent wine and that ridiculously expensive Belgian chocolate Lila pretends not to crave." Nathaniel recognized his friend's transparent matchmaking but accepted nonetheless. The prospect of sharing his love of sailing with Lila, being completely in his element while introducing her to something new, held undeniable appeal. When he picked her up at sunset, Lila's eyes widened appreciatively at his casual appearance, faded jeans, and a simple white linen shirt rolled at the sleeves, so different from his usual bespoke suits. "I almost didn't recognize you without a tie," she teased, a canvas weekend bag slung over her shoulder. She dressed appropriately in white linen pants and a turquoise top that highlighted the rich undertones of her skin, her hair wrapped in a colorful scarf against the wind. At the marina, Nathaniel guided her aboard with practiced ease, his hand at the small of her back steadying her as she stepped onto the gently rocking deck. The intimate confines of the sailboat created natural proximity as he oriented her to the vessel's layout, his body close behind hers as he demonstrated the basics of sailing. "My grandfather taught me when I was 10, he explained as they navigated away from the dock, the evening sun casting long golden rays across the water. Said the water doesn't care who your family is or how much money you have. It demands respect and proper technique regardless." Lila proved a quick study, her natural grace extending to nautical movements as she helped adjust sails and navigate the tranquil waters. As Washington's monuments receded behind them, Nathaniel felt tension he hadn't realized he carried begin to dissipate. Replaced by a contentment so unfamiliar, it was almost disorienting. They anchored in a secluded cove as twilight descended, the boat gently rocking while Nathaniel prepared the simple but elegant dinner Marcus had arranged. Fresh seafood, crusty bread, and seasonal vegetables accompanied by an exceptional Sancerre. They ate on deck beneath an emerging canopy of stars, the city lights distant enough to permit true darkness. "I've never seen you this relaxed," Lila observed, watching him over the rim of her wine glass. "It suits you." Nathaniel smiled, acknowledging the truth in her observation. "The water has always been my sanctuary. No phones, no meetings, no expectations except competence. And yet you live in a penthouse in the city, surrounded by those expectations daily. Easier to meet expectations than risk disappointment," he replied. The wine, perhaps loosening his usual guardedness, Lila studied him thoughtfully, drawing her knees up to her chest as the evening air cooled around them. "What would disappoint you most, Nathaniel? Not living up to others' expectations or not living up to your own?" The question penetrated more deeply than she could have known. Before he could formulate a response, a sudden gust extinguished their lantern, leaving them illuminated only by stars and the distant shimmer of the Capitol's lights, reflecting on the water. "Let me get matches," he offered, moving to stand. "Wait," Lila said, her hand catching his wrist. Sometimes darkness makes truth easier to speak. In the intimate shadows, Seated beside each other on the cushioned bench that wrapped around the stern, Nathaniel felt the protective distance he'd maintained beginning to collapse when Lila's hand found his in the darkness, fingers intertwining with quiet certainty. Something within him surrendered. "Why do you keep everyone at arm's length?" she asked, her voice gentle but insistent. "Even now, when we're clearly moving towards something meaningful, you create these invisible boundaries." Instead of the reflexive deflection he might normally offer, Nathaniel found himself speaking from a place of raw honesty. "Because the last time I fully trusted someone, she systematically dismantled my life." In the darkness of the gently rocking boat, surrounded by water that isolated them from the world's interruptions, Nathaniel finally shared the complete story he typically kept carefully guarded. He spoke of his former fiancée, Victoria, who had orchestrated their entire relationship with calculating precision. A beautiful, accomplished woman who had seemed his perfect complement in every way. She studied me first, learned my preferences, my habits, anticipated my needs before I expressed them. For 18 months, I believed I'd found someone who truly understood me. His voice hardened with remembered pain. Then, a week before our wedding, I discovered documentation on her computer, detailed plans for our divorce, including which assets she'd target, which friends she'd cultivate for leverage, even a timeline for the entire process. Lila's sharp intake of breath reflected genuine shock. "That's pathological. That's strategic," he corrected, bitterness edging his tone. "At least in certain Washington circles. Her father lost everything in the 2008 crash. Marrying into stability was her family's calculated recovery plan." He stared out at the dark water, moonlight now silvering the gentle waves. The worst part wasn't the financial deception. It was realizing that every intimate moment, every vulnerability she'd shared, every time she'd comforted me or challenged me or seemed to truly see me, had been performance art, a means to an end. "And so you built walls," Lila concluded softly, her thumb tracing soothing patterns against his palm. "And I threatened them from that first night." His eyes sought hers in the darkness, her face illuminated by soft moonlight that seemed to render pretense impossible. "You demolished them in a single night." It was unsettling. As he spoke, Lila moved closer, her free hand coming to rest against his chest, directly over his heart. The warmth of her palm penetrated the thin fabric of his shirt, creating an anchor point in the midst of painful recollection. "By closing yourself off," she said, echoing words from their evening on the bay, "haven't you allowed her to steal your future as well as your past? Each time you walk away from connection, isn't she still controlling your choices?" The question landed with unexpected force, challenging assumptions he'd built his life around for years. But unlike at the estate, where power and bright lights had interrupted their moment of truth, here on the water, nothing separated them from honest reckoning. "Yes," he admitted, the single syllable containing years of realization. "I've given her power. She doesn't even know she still holds." Lila's hand moved from his chest to his face, her palm warm against his cheek. What would freedom from that look like? Instead of answering with words, Nathaniel bridged the small distance between them. Their kiss began gently, an acknowledgement of vulnerability shared, but quickly deepened into something more urgent. Years of carefully maintained control dissolved as he drew her onto his lap, her knees bracketing his hips as her hands threaded through his hair. Unlike their first night together, this wasn't about physical attraction alone. Each touch carried the weight of newly shared truth, each kiss a step toward demolishing barriers neither had fully acknowledged. When Lila's hands moved to unbutton his shirt, her fingers trembling slightly with emotion rather than uncertainty, Nathaniel covered them with his own. "Are you sure?" he asked, needing her absolute clarity. In answer, she guided his hands to the hem of her top, her eyes never leaving his, as he slowly lifted it over her head, revealing smooth brown skin silvered by moonlight. The sight of her strong yet vulnerable, confident yet tender, undid him completely. They made their way below deck to the boat's small but comfortable cabin, where the gentle rocking of the vessel seemed to create its own rhythm for their exploration. This time, their lovemaking was unhurried and profoundly intimate, each caress a question, and answer both. Each shared breath a promise neither was ready to voice but both were beginning to feel. Afterward, they lay entwined in the narrow berth, Lila's head resting on his chest as he traced abstract patterns along the curve of her spine. Outside, water lapped gently against the hull, while night creatures called to one another across the cove. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," Lila murmured, her voice drowsy with contentment. Nathaniel considered the request, then offered a truth he'd scarcely acknowledged to himself. "I'm afraid of becoming my father." Accomplished but ultimately alone. His father had died of a heart attack at his desk, discovered by his assistant rather than family. His relationship sacrificed to ambition decades earlier. Lila pressed a kiss to his chest, directly over his heart. "And I'm afraid my time is limited, that my cancer could return and cut short whatever future I imagine." The vulnerable exchange created something new between them. A foundation built on shared fears, rather than projected strength. In the darkness of the cabin, in the middle of the water that had always been his sanctuary, Nathaniel realized he was navigating emotional territory, more challenging and rewarding than any ocean he'd ever sailed. "Stay with me until morning," he whispered against her hair, reversing their positions from months earlier. "Not just physically here, but with me, present, no walls." Her answer was to reach for his hand, bringing it to rest between her breasts, where he could feel her heartbeat, strong, steady, and completely open to him. Dawn found them on deck, wrapped in blankets against the morning chill, watching the sun rise over the water. Lila leaned back against Nathaniel's chest, his arms encircling her waist as they shared coffee from a single travel mug. "Where do we go from here?" he asked, his chin resting atop her head. Lila turned in his embrace, her expression serene yet determined. "Forward," she said simply. "Together, building something neither of us thought possible." As they sailed back toward the Washington Marina, the monuments growing larger on the horizon, Nathaniel realized the walls he'd so carefully constructed weren't lying in ruins as he'd feared. Instead, they were being transformed not into barriers that isolated, but into foundations upon which something stronger and more beautiful might be built. Chapter 6. The First Twist. September in Washington brought perfect weather and a renewed social season. After their transformative night on the water, Nathaniel and Lila had settled into a deepening relationship that both cherished yet kept private from Washington's gossiping elite. They created their own intimate world in hidden corners of the city. Jazz clubs in Shaw, early morning hikes in Rock Creek Park, quiet evenings cooking together in her Georgetown kitchen or his penthouse. "You realize people are talking," Marcus remarked during their monthly squash game. Two eligible, attractive people, suddenly unavailable for charity galas and political fundraisers. "Washington notices." Nathaniel executed a perfect corner shot before responding. "Let them talk. What we're building deserves protection from public scrutiny." The Smithsonian Founders Gala arrived in late September, an event neither could reasonably avoid given their respective positions. After much discussion, they decided to attend together, their first official public appearance as a couple. "Ready for this?" Nathaniel asked as his car approached the museum's illuminated entrance, where photographers documented arriving guests. Lila looked spectacular in a gown of deep burgundy silk, her natural hair styled in an elaborate updo adorned with vintage pearl pins. "For the photography gauntlet, absolutely. For the inevitable questions about our relationship from people who pretend they haven't been gossiping about us for weeks." Less enthusiastic, their entrance together created the subtle ripple of awareness they'd anticipated. Raised eyebrows, exchanged glances, discreetly whispered observations. They separated briefly as Lila consulted with her committee chairperson about an upcoming initiative. Standing alone near a display of Tiffany glass, Nathaniel observed her across the room, struck anew by her natural elegance. "She has a remarkable presence," came an unfamiliar voice beside him, so poised yet genuine. Nathaniel turned to find an elderly woman with aristocratic bearing studying him intently. Her silver hair was arranged in an impeccable chignon, and though she must have been well into her 72nd, her posture remained regal and her gaze sharp. "I'm sorry," Nathaniel replied politely. "I don't believe we've met." "And no, we haven't," the woman acknowledged, offering a gloved hand. "Margaret Langley. I knew your father quite well, Edward." The mistake was understandable. Nathaniel had often been told he was the image of his father in his younger days. "I'm Nathaniel Brooks," he corrected gently. "Edward was my father. He passed away 12 years ago." Something flickered in Margaret's expression. Surprise followed by genuine distress. "Edward is gone? I had no idea. I've been abroad for many years." She pressed a hand to her chest. "My condolences. He was significant to me once." Before Nathaniel could inquire further, Margaret's attention shifted to Lila, who was making her way back toward them. The older woman's gaze intensified, studying Lila with unsettling focus. "Your companion," Margaret said quietly. "May I ask her name?" "Lila Morgan," Nathaniel replied, increasingly puzzled. Margaret's sharp intake of breath was audible. "Morgan," she repeated, her voice strained. "The diplomat's daughter." Instead of answering his question, Margaret extracted a photograph from her vintage evening bag. "This was taken at Meridian House in 1984, she said. Holding it for Nathaniel to see, the photo showed a younger Margaret standing beside Nathaniel's father, handsome and serious in his early 32nd, his arm around her waist in a gesture of intimacy that surprised Nathaniel. "We were involved before his marriage to your mother," Margaret explained. "It ended rather abruptly when he met Charlotte." Margaret interrupted his thoughts, her voice low and urgent. "There's something you should know. After Edward and I parted ways, I discovered I was expecting—" The statement hit Nathaniel with physical force. "You had my father's child." "A daughter," Margaret confirmed, her gaze still fixed on Lila. "Born in 1984, Nathaniel felt the room tilt slightly. His eyes darted between Margaret and Lila, searching for resemblances he might have missed. At 34, Lila's age aligned with Margaret's timeline. "That's impossible," he managed, though doubt had already taken root. Lila's parents were diplomats. Everyone knew them. "Did you ever meet them?" Margaret asked with quiet certainty. "Or have you relied on others' accounts?" Washington excels at constructing convenient narratives, especially to protect powerful men and the children they never acknowledged. Before Nathaniel could respond, Lila reached them, her smile warm as she slipped her arm through his. "Sorry for the delay." The committee chair had endless questions. Margaret's scrutiny of Lila became even more intense. "My dear," she said, voice trembling slightly, "you have your father's eyes." Confusion crossed Lila's face. "I'm sorry. I don't believe we've met. Are you a friend of the Morgans?" "No," Margaret replied cryptically, "but I believe I knew your father quite well." With that, she pressed a card into Lila's hand. "When you're ready to discuss this further, please call. Some truths shouldn't remain buried forever." She departed quickly, disappearing into the crowd before either could process the encounter. Nathaniel stood frozen, his mind racing through impossible calculations. If true, the woman he'd been falling in love with could be his half-sister. The thought made him physically ill. "What was that about?" Lila asked, clearly puzzled. Nathaniel noticed a flicker of something in Lila's expression, not just confusion, but something deeper. Had she encountered Margaret before? The question lingered, but his immediate turmoil overshadowed it. "An old acquaintance of my father's," he managed, his voice unnaturally tight. Apparently, they knew each other years ago. Throughout the remainder of the evening, Nathaniel maintained a facade of normalcy while inwardly reeling. Each time Lila touched him, he felt revulsion not at her, but at the possibility of what they might unknowingly have done. In the car, returning to her brownstone, Lila finally confronted his strange behavior. "You've barely spoken for the past hour. Did something happen?" "Just tired," he lied, unable to voice his suspicions without evidence. At her door, when she reached for him with clear intention for him to come inside, he stepped back instinctively. Hurt flashed across her face before she masked it with dignity. "I see," she said quietly. "Lila," he began, but stopped, paralyzed by the terrible possibility Margaret had planted. "When you're ready to tell me what's really wrong, call me," she said, disappearing into her home. Returning to his penthouse, Nathaniel began methodically analyzing what he knew. The timeline made Margaret's claim possible. Could the Morgans have adopted Margaret's child as their own, perhaps to protect his father's reputation during his political aspirations? By dawn, he'd made a decision. He would investigate Margaret's claims thoroughly before speaking to Lila. He placed calls to a private investigator and his father's former personal attorney, then canceled all appointments. Unable to focus on anything beyond his growing dread, his phone buzzed repeatedly throughout the day. Texts from Lila expressing concern, then frustration at his silence. By evening, unable to bear the tension of waiting for information, he drove to Marcus's home, seeking insight from the one person who might have knowledge of Lila's early life. "I need to ask you something about Lila, and I need absolute honesty," Nathaniel said, without preamble. "What's happened?" Marcus asked, immediately concerned. "How long have your parents known the Morgans?" "All my life, at least. They met during graduate school at Howard before any of us were born." "Why? And you're certain the Morgans are Lila's biological parents? There was never any mention of adoption?" Marcus studied his friend with growing concern. "Where is this coming from, Nathaniel?" Nathaniel explained Margaret's claim about having his father's child born in 1984. Understanding dawned in Marcus's expression. "And you think—" He broke off, shaking his head in disbelief. "That's impossible. I've known Lila since she was born. She looks exactly like her mother, has her father's academic intensity." Marcus retrieved a leather-bound album from his bookshelf. "Here," he said, flipping to a specific page. "Evelyn and Victor Morgan with newborn Lila, June 1991. My parents are standing right beside them at the hospital." The photograph showed a clearly exhausted but radiant black woman in a hospital bed, holding a newborn with a cap of dark curls. Beside her stood a tall, distinguished black man with the same high forehead Lila possessed. "And here," Marcus continued, turning pages, is Lila's third birthday at our house, her fifth at the embassy residence in London, her high school graduation with both parents. Each image confirmed what Marcus was insisting. Lila was unquestionably the Morgans' biological child. Moreover, the dates revealed she was born in 1991, 7 years after Margaret's supposed pregnancy. Then who was Margaret talking about? Nathaniel wondered aloud, relief washing through him. I don't know, Marcus replied, but whatever child she had, it wasn't Lila. His expression hardened. Please tell me you haven't said anything to Lila about this absurd suspicion. No, but I've been distant since the gala. I couldn't bear to touch her while that possibility existed. You need to fix this immediately, Marcus insisted. Lila deserves better than mysterious withdrawal based on some stranger's claims. Outside Lila's brownstone, Nathaniel hesitated briefly before climbing the steps to her door. When she opened it, her expression was carefully neutral, though the shadows beneath her eyes suggested she'd slept no better than he had. This is unexpected, she said coolly. 48 hours of silence, and now you appear on my doorstep. I deserve that, he acknowledged. May I come in? I owe you an explanation. In her living room, photographs of the parents he now knew were unquestionably hers lined the bookshelves. Ambassador Morgan receiving credentials at Buckingham Palace, Dr. Morgan accepting an award, both with a young Lila at diplomatic posts around the world. Margaret Langley approached me before you joined us at the gala, he began. She claimed to have had an affair with my father that resulted in a daughter born in 1984, and she implied that I was that daughter? Lila asked, her voice carefully controlled. She did more than imply it, Nathaniel confirmed. She stated it with absolute certainty, and you believed her. It wasn't a question but an observation. I didn't know what to believe, he admitted. The timing seemed to align with your age. She suggested the Morgans had adopted her child to protect my father's reputation. So rather than ask me about this outlandish claim, you chose to withdraw completely. Hurt penetrated her composure. After everything we've shared, your instinct was to pull away without explanation. I was wrong, he said simply. I verified that her claim is impossible. Marcus showed me photos of you as a newborn with your mother in the hospital. Images throughout your childhood, with both parents. You were born in 1991. 7 years after Margaret's supposed pregnancy. I could have told you that if you'd asked, Lila replied, anger finally surfacing. Instead, you left me wondering what I'd done wrong, why you suddenly couldn't bear to touch me. I'm sorry, he said sincerely. I was horrified by the possibility, sickened by what it would mean about us. I needed certainty before burdening you with such a disturbing suggestion. What you needed was to trust me enough to have an honest conversation. She corrected. Relationships require courage, Nathaniel. The courage to face uncomfortable truths together, rather than retreating behind walls at the first sign of difficulty. Her phone rang with Marcus's distinctive tone. She glanced at it, then back at Nathaniel, with newfound understanding. You went to Marcus before coming to me. I needed confirmation about your parents, he admitted. She answered the call, her eyes never leaving Nathaniel's face. Yes, he's here now. No, don't worry. I'll handle this. She ended the call and set her phone aside. What Marcus doesn't know, she said with quiet intensity, is that Margaret Langley approached me 2 weeks ago at a gallery opening. She told me the same story, claiming I was Edward Brooks's unacknowledged daughter. Nathaniel's shock must have been visible. You never mentioned this, because I immediately recognized something was wrong with her. The dates didn't align with my birth year, and her behavior was erratic. One moment lucid, the next confused about where she was. Lila's expression softened slightly. I had my assistant discreetly inquire about her. Margaret's nephew reported she's been experiencing early cognitive decline, sometimes confusing people in timeline. Why didn't you tell me she'd approached you? I was waiting to see if you trusted me enough to bring it to me directly, instead of investigating behind my back. Her disappointment was palpable. I needed to know if you were brave enough to face difficulties together rather than retreating to your solitary patterns. The realization of how completely he'd failed her test staggered him. Lila, I understand fear, Nathaniel. What I can't accept is that you didn't respect me enough to share yours. She moved toward the door, signaling the conversation was ending. I think we both need time to consider whether we want the same things going forward. As he stepped onto her porch, Nathaniel turned back to face her. I do love you, he said, the words emerging for the first time. My fear doesn't change that. Perhaps not, she acknowledged, her expression softening slightly. But love without trust has no foundation. When you're ready to build that foundation, you know where to find me. The door closed gently but definitively between them, leaving Nathaniel alone with the realization that Margaret's false revelation had revealed a far more significant truth. Despite all their progress, He still hadn't learned to lower his walls completely. The question now was whether he could find the courage to truly change before losing the woman who had shown him a life beyond his carefully constructed isolation. Chapter 7. The Investigation. October brought crisp autumn air to Washington and an agonizing silence between Nathaniel and Lila. He respected her request for time, though every day without her felt like punishment. His calls went directly to voicemail. His carefully composed texts received only brief, polite responses. Sleepless nights became routine as Nathaniel replayed their final conversation, recognizing how profoundly he'd failed her test. Despite their intimacy, when faced with a crisis, he'd reverted to solitary problem-solving rather than trusting her enough to share his fears. Determined to understand the mystery that had fractured their relationship, Nathaniel focused on Margaret Langley's claims. If she'd lied about Lila, did that mean she'd lied about everything? Or was there another child his father had never acknowledged? In his father's former study, a room Nathaniel had preserved exactly as Edward Brooks had left it, he began a methodical search through personal files. Behind a false panel in the antique desk, he discovered a small fireproof box containing letters tied with faded ribbon. The correspondence confirmed Margaret's account of their relationship. Passionate letters spanning 1,984 to 1,985, ending abruptly around the time Edward would have met Nathaniel's mother. The final letter from Margaret, dated February 1986, contained a cryptic reference. "I will carry this burden alone, since you've made your choice. Perhaps someday you'll want to know her, but I won't disrupt the life you're building." His private investigator reported that Margaret Langley had indeed given birth to a daughter in September 1986, a child named Celeste, who had been immediately placed for private adoption through an agency known for handling arrangements for Washington's elite. The adoptive family, the Warrens of Boston, had no connection to D.C. political circles, so, "She does have a daughter by my father," Nathaniel mused aloud, staring at the report in his downtown office. Just not Lila. The revelation created more questions than answers. Had his father known about this child? Had his mother? The timing suggested Margaret had become pregnant shortly before his parents' marriage, a relationship that ended when Edward met Charlotte. As Nathaniel dug deeper, additional concerns emerged. A recent medical review of his father's records showed the hereditary heart condition that had claimed Edward Brooks's life at 52. The cardiologist's notes included a recommendation for immediate family to undergo preventative screening advice Nathaniel had never received after his father's death. As his mother had shielded him from medical details, she deemed unnecessarily frightening for a son who had just lost his father. His father's attorney provided the final piece of the puzzle during a discreet lunch at the Metropolitan Club. "Edward knew," confirmed Walter Grayson. Now in his 72nd, Margaret informed him shortly after the birth. He set up a trust for the child's education but honored Margaret's request not to interfere in her life. "Did my mother know?" Nathaniel asked, dreading the answer. "Charlotte knew everything," Walter replied, surprising him. "Your parents had a more complex relationship than you realized. They loved each other deeply but navigated certain realities of Washington life with pragmatism. The trust was created with Charlotte's full knowledge and blessing. Why keep it secret from me? Edward intended to tell you when you were older." After his heart attack, Charlotte decided the information served no purpose except to potentially complicate your memory of him. Nathaniel absorbed this revelation about his parents' marriage, not the uncomplicated love story he'd believed, but something more nuanced and perhaps stronger for its acknowledgement of human fallibility. "There's something else you should know," Walter added, hesitation evident in his voice. "Your father's heart condition, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, is hereditary. There's a 50% chance you've inherited it." "I'm aware," Nathaniel replied, though in truth he'd avoided medical screening, subconsciously fearing confirmation of vulnerability. "I've been meaning to schedule comprehensive testing." Walter's gaze sharpened. "Don't delay, Nathaniel. Edward ignored symptoms for years before his final attack. Early intervention might have extended his life significantly." The conversation cast a shadow over Nathaniel's thoughts as he drove back to his office. His father, the man he'd admired unconditionally, had kept secrets, avoided medical intervention that might have saved his life, and potentially passed along a genetic time bomb to his son. The parallels to Nathaniel's own behavior, keeping Lila at arm's length when faced with difficult truths, avoiding medical screening that might confirm weakness, were uncomfortably clear. A week of reflection followed. He updated Marcus on his findings but didn't attempt to contact Lila with this new information. In truth, the mystery of Celeste Warren felt secondary to the relationship he'd damaged through his lack of trust. The investigation had revealed more about himself than about his family history. His instinct to retreat behind walls when confronted with uncertainty remained his greatest liability. His breakthrough came unexpectedly during a pre-dawn run along the mall, with the Capitol dome illuminated against the lightening sky. Halfway through his route, he encountered a familiar figure also running. Lila, her breath visible in the chilly air. They slowed simultaneously, the surprise of their encounter momentarily suspending the tension between them. "Early for you," she commented, her tone neutral, though her eyes reflected the same sleeplessness that plagued him. "I haven't been sleeping well," he admitted. They fell into step together without discussion, running in silence past the Washington Monument and toward the Lincoln Memorial. The familiar rhythm of feet hitting pavement created a meditative space where words became possible. "I found her," Nathaniel said finally as they paused by the reflecting pool. "Margaret's daughter. She exists, but she's not you. Her name is Celeste Warren. Raised in Boston with no connection to D.C. Lila's expression softened slightly. "I suspected as much. Margaret's cognitive decline explains her confusion about dates and identities, but not why she fixated on me specifically. That remains a mystery," Nathaniel acknowledged. "Perhaps she saw a resemblance between you and Celeste, or maybe in her confused state. The timing of my father's relationship with my mother became scrambled with her own timeline." They stood side by side, watching dawn light dance across the water before them. "I've done some soul-searching these past weeks," Nathaniel continued, "about why I immediately withdrew instead of coming to you with Margaret's claims, about patterns I've established over decades of keeping people at a safe distance." "And what did you discover?" Lila asked, her voice gentle despite the hurt he'd caused. "That I'm more like my father than I realized. Keeping secrets to maintain an image of strength, avoiding vulnerability even when it costs me what matters most." He turned to face her directly. "I'm trying to change patterns established over decades. I'll make mistakes, but I'm committed to doing better, to being worthy of your trust." Instead of responding directly, Lila glanced at her watch. "Marcus and Zara are hosting a dinner tomorrow night for her birthday. Will you be there?" "I'm bringing the wine," he confirmed. "Perhaps we could arrive together," she suggested, a small olive branch extended around 7. The modest invitation represented far more than a social arrangement. It was a tentative step back toward the connection they'd been building. Nathaniel recognized it as the precious opportunity it was. "I'll pick you up at 6:30, he promised, resisting the urge to reach for her, respecting the careful distance she maintained. As he watched her jog away toward her Georgetown home, Nathaniel felt cautious hope replacing the despair that had accompanied him through recent weeks. The path forward would require genuine change and consistent effort. But for the first time in his life, the walls he'd constructed seemed less like protection and more like a prison. With Lila, he glimpsed a life beyond those walls, one worth the vulnerability required to claim it. That evening, staring at the gardenia plant that had inexplicably continued to thrive in his penthouse greenhouse, Nathaniel made a decision. Celeste Warren deserved to know about her biological father and the educational trust established for her. More importantly, she deserved to know about the half-brother who now wished to welcome her into his life. However belatedly, he also made an appointment with a cardiologist for comprehensive testing, the evaluation his father had avoided until it was too late. If he carried the same genetic predisposition to heart problems, he wanted to know now, while preventative measures might still prove effective. More importantly, he wanted to share this vulnerability with Lila rather than shield her from it, a concrete demonstration of his commitment to transparency, even when it revealed his weaknesses. The investigation that had begun as a desperate attempt to disprove his connection to Lila had revealed an actual sibling he'd never known existed. The irony wasn't lost on him. In pushing away someone who wasn't family, he'd discovered family he hadn't known to seek, and in confronting his father's secrets, he'd found the courage to live more honestly himself. Tomorrow evening with Lila represented a new beginning, not a return to where they'd been, but a chance to build something stronger, with honesty and shared vulnerability as its foundation. The knowledge that she was willing to try again despite his failings felt like a gift he was determined to prove worthy of receiving. Chapter 8. The Confession. Marcus and Zara's elegant townhouse glowed with warmth against the autumn evening when Nathaniel arrived at Lila's door. She opened it wearing a simple emerald dress that left her shoulders bare, her hair adorned with small crystal pins that caught the light when she moved. For a moment, he simply absorbed the sight of her, realizing how profoundly he'd missed her presence. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering a bouquet of white gardenias. Her smile, the first genuine one he'd seen in weeks, made his heart stutter. "You remembered." She brought the flowers to her face, inhaling their complex fragrance. The drive to Cleveland Park was filled with cautious conversation, both navigating the delicate balance between their lingering tension and the connection neither could deny. At the doorway to Marcus's home, Nathaniel gently touched Lila's elbow, halting her before they entered. "Before we go in," he said quietly, "I want you to know that whatever happens between us, I'm grateful for tonight, for the chance to try again." Her eyes softened. "We haven't reached the whatever happens part yet, Nathaniel. We're still writing this story." The dinner proved more healing than either anticipated. Among trusted friends, the awkwardness gradually dissolved, replaced by genuine laughter and the easy rapport they'd developed over months together. Marcus observed their carefully choreographed interactions with knowing eyes, while Zara masterfully guided conversation toward neutral topics. After dessert, Zara requested Lila's help selecting music in the library, leaving Marcus and Nathaniel alone on the terrace with aged cognac. "She's giving you another chance," Marcus observed once the women were out of earshot. "Don't waste it." "I know. I'm still not entirely sure I deserve it." "That's probably why you do," his friend replied. The old Nathaniel would assume he deserved everything without question. Inside, separated by a hallway from the men, Zara was equally direct with Lila. "He's miserable without you, almost as miserable as you've been." "We hurt each other," Lila admitted. "Me with my test of his trust, him with his instinct to retreat. The question is whether what you're building is worth the pain of growth," Zara said wisely. "No one changes overnight, Lila. The question is whether they're willing to try at all." As rain began to fall outside, Marcus offered their guest room to Lila, rather than having Nathaniel drive her home in deteriorating conditions. The unexpected arrangement created a new intimacy, sharing the same house but separate spaces, a metaphor for their current emotional state. Later, unable to sleep, Nathaniel wandered to the kitchen for water, finding Lila already there in borrowed silk pajamas, illuminated only by the refrigerator light as she poured juice. "I couldn't sleep either," he admitted when she noticed him. "Too many thoughts," she agreed, closing the refrigerator and plunging them into moonlit darkness. Relieved only by occasional lightning, they sat at the breakfast nook in comfortable silence until a particularly loud thunderclap shook the windows, reminiscent of their night at the Chesapeake. "I contacted her," Nathaniel said suddenly. "Celeste. I sent a letter introducing myself and explaining our connection." Lila's surprise was evident. "That's a significant step. Margaret's mistake led me to a sister I never knew existed. Perhaps some good can come from the pain she caused us." He hesitated, then continued, "I've also scheduled comprehensive cardiac screening." This revelation clearly stunned her more than the news about Celeste. "Because of your father's heart condition?" "Yes. I should have done it years ago, but I avoided confirmation of potential weakness. Another pattern I'm trying to break." His hand sought hers across the table. "I'm done hiding vulnerabilities, Lila, whether physical or emotional." When their fingers intertwined, the simple contact felt more intimate than their most passionate encounters. "I've been seeing someone, a therapist," he continued, the admission clearly difficult for him. This revelation stunned her. Nathaniel Brooks, famous for his self-sufficiency, voluntarily seeking therapy, represented a seismic shift. "It's helping me understand patterns I've never questioned," he explained. "Why I retreat when vulnerable, why I process alone rather than lean on others." His grip on her hand tightened slightly. "Why I nearly lost the best thing that's happened to me in years." Lightning illuminated tears gathering in Lila's eyes. "That's all I wanted," she whispered. "Not perfection, partnership." Thunder shook the house again. Then the power failed, plunging them into complete darkness. Without speaking, they found each other in the blackness, their kiss gentle at first, then increasingly urgent. Months of longing and weeks of separation created a hunger neither attempted to disguise. "Not here," Lila murmured against his lips. "Not in Marcus's kitchen." They navigated the darkened house to Nathaniel's guest room, where moonlight now streamed through rain-streaked windows. Their reunion was both tender and fierce. Hands relearning familiar terrain, whispered apologies and promises punctuating each caress, bodies remembering patterns discovered in happier times. Afterward, tangled in sheets on each other, Lila traced the contours of his face in the darkness. "I need to tell you something I discovered during my annual checkup last week." Her serious tone immediately concerned him. "What is it?" "My oncologist found some concerning markers in my routine blood work." "Nothing definitive," she added quickly, feeling him tense beneath her touch, "but enough that they want to do additional testing." Fear clutched at Nathaniel's heart. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I needed to know if we had a future before burdening you with my medical uncertainties," she explained. "I was diagnosed with leukemia when I was 9 years old. After 3 years of treatment, I've been in remission for over 2 decades. But cancer survivors live with the perpetual possibility of recurrence. It's part of loving me, If that's still what you want. The revelation stunned him. This vital piece of her history she'd never shared. Suddenly, her volunteer work at Children's National Hospital carried deeper significance, as did her philosophical approach to life's fragility. In response, Nathaniel gathered her closer. His embrace communicating what words couldn't adequately express. Nothing could make me turn away from you again, he vowed against her hair. Whatever comes, we face it together. As dawn approached, they lay awake, planning practical next steps. Doctor appointments, treatment possibilities if needed. Research into experimental protocols, the very conversations Nathaniel might once have avoided, now felt like sacred territory, the privilege of being trusted with her fears, of being allowed to support rather than being shut out. No matter what the tests show, he promised as morning light gradually illuminated their entwined forms. You won't face any of it alone. Her smile against his chest contained both vulnerability and newfound confidence in their bond. Neither will you, she replied. A promise that extended beyond her health to all the challenges life would inevitably bring. The storm had passed, leaving washed streets and clearer skies. Whatever uncertainty the future held, they would navigate it together, a commitment more profound than any they'd made in happier moments. Chapter 9. The Promise. November brought falling leaves, political fundraisers, and, for Lila and Nathaniel, a series of medical appointments that tested their rekindled relationship. The additional tests her oncologist had ordered revealed concerning patterns in her bone marrow not a definitive recurrence of her childhood leukemia, but enough abnormal cells to warrant close monitoring and preventative measures. We call it a pre-leukemic state, explained Dr. Elena Patel at Georgetown University Hospital's Oncology Center. The goal is preventing progression to full-blown disease. Simultaneously, Nathaniel's cardiac evaluation confirmed what he had feared. Early signs of his father's hereditary heart condition were already present, though not yet symptomatic. Hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, his cardiologist explained, showing him imaging of his heart's slightly thickened muscle walls. With medication, lifestyle modifications, and careful monitoring, most patients lead normal lifespans, but left unaddressed, it can cause sudden cardiac events, particularly under stress. The dual diagnoses created a profound shift in their relationship. Rather than one supporting the other through a medical crisis, they both faced health challenges simultaneously, a shared vulnerability neither had anticipated. Nathaniel attended every one of Lila's appointments, mastering medical terminology and treatment protocols with the same intensity he applied to business acquisitions. While she underwent bone marrow biopsies and specialized blood work, he researched experimental treatments and clinical trials, creating detailed spreadsheets of options should conventional approaches fail. Similarly, Lila accompanied him to cardiology consultations, taking detailed notes about medication side effects and exercise restrictions, researching the latest innovations in cardiac care with the determined focus she typically applied to international development projects. One evening, returning from a particularly difficult appointment, Lila found him surrounded by medical journals in his penthouse study. You don't have to become an oncologist overnight, she said gently, removing a heavy textbook from his lap. Knowledge is control, he replied, pulling her down beside him. And since we can't control the disease, we can at least understand it completely. His dedication moved her deeply, yet Lila recognized his research as partly deflection. Focusing on medical science felt more manageable than confronting the emotional reality of her potential illness. During their separation, Nathaniel had made progress in vulnerability, but facing possible loss still challenged his deepest defenses. Let's take a break from cancer tonight, she suggested, closing his laptop decisively. I want to dance with the man I love, drink exceptional wine, and pretend the world beyond this penthouse doesn't exist. They created their own private celebration, dancing barefoot in his living room to Ella Fitzgerald, while Washington's first snow of the season fell beyond floor-to-ceiling windows. In these precious hours, they reclaimed joy deliberately, refusing to let medical uncertainty eclipse their present happiness. Later, wrapped in his arms beneath cashmere blankets on the terrace, warmed by outdoor heaters against the November chill, Lila broached the subject they'd been avoiding. If my condition worsens, there are decisions we'll need to make, she began carefully, about our future, about how aggressive my treatment should be. Nathaniel's arms tightened around her. We'll pursue every possible option, regardless of cost or location. European protocols, experimental treatments. That's not what I mean, she interrupted gently. There's a point where quantity of life sacrifices quality. I've seen too many patients endure brutal treatments for minimal time extension. She turned in his embrace to face him. I need to know you'll respect my choices about my body, even when they're difficult for you to accept. The request challenged his deepest instincts to protect, to control, to fix what threatened her. Yet Nathaniel recognized the courage it took for her to claim this agency, when so much else remained uncertain. "I promise," he said finally, the words costing him visibly. "But in return, promise me you won't give up prematurely, that you'll fight as hard as your doctors recommend before considering palliative options." Their agreement, sealed with gentle kisses that deepened into passionate commitment, represented a new maturity in their relationship, acknowledging the difficult terrain ahead while choosing to navigate it with mutual respect rather than fear-driven control. The next morning, while Lila showered, Nathaniel received an unexpected call. Celeste Warren had received his letter and wished to meet him. The half-sister he'd never known would be in Washington the following week for a conference and suggested lunch. When he shared the news with Lila, her joy for him was immediate and genuine, despite her own medical concerns. "This is wonderful," she exclaimed, helping him select a restaurant where they could talk privately. "She must be curious about your father, about the biological heritage she never knew." Her generosity in focusing on his newfound family, while facing her own health crisis, reminded Nathaniel why he'd fallen in love with her. Lila's capacity for embracing life's complexities without resentment continued to humble him. The meeting with Celeste proved more healing than Nathaniel anticipated. A successful Boston architect with their father's analytical mind and a warm smile entirely her own, Celeste had known she was adopted but never sought her biological parents, content with the loving family who'd raised her. "I never felt something was missing," she explained over lunch at a quiet Georgetown restaurant. "But when your letter came, I realized there were questions I'd never acknowledged having." Their conversation flowed easily, establishing connections without forced intimacy. Celeste showed photos of her husband and young daughter, while Nathaniel shared stories of their father that filled gaps in her understanding of her biological heritage. "Would you like to meet Lila?" he asked as their lunch concluded. "She's an important part of my life, and Margaret's confusion about her identity is what ultimately led me to discover you." That weekend, the three dined together at Nathaniel's penthouse, the evening marked by surprising ease and genuine connection. Watching Celeste and Lila discover shared interests in sustainable architecture and documentary films, Nathaniel felt a sense of family expanding beyond biological boundaries. As November ended, Nathaniel and Lila both underwent follow-up medical evaluations that would determine their next steps. With their test results pending, he suggested they escape Washington entirely. Paris, he proposed impulsively over breakfast. "You've always wanted to see the Musée d'Orsay. My cardiologist cleared me for travel, and your blood work is stable enough. Let's go next week." Lila looked up from her tea, surprise giving way to delight. "Just like that? No 6-month planning horizon?" "Just like that," he confirmed. "Life is uncertain, as we've both been forcefully reminded. I don't want to postpone joy any longer." The spontaneity represented a profound shift from the meticulously controlled existence Nathaniel had maintained for decades. Medical challenges had altered his perspective irrevocably. The illusion of guaranteed time replaced by appreciation for present moments, however fragile or fleeting. Paris in early December proved magical. Christmas lights tracing historic architecture, fewer tourists crowding iconic sites, intimate dinners in centuries-old bistros where they lingered for hours over extraordinary food and conversation. They visited museums at Lila's pace when fatigue limited her stamina and rested in their hotel when Nathaniel's medication temporarily lowered his blood pressure. On their final evening, Nathaniel arranged a private dinner cruise along the Seine. As they passed beneath historic bridges, illuminated against the night sky, the Eiffel Tower periodically sparkling in synchronized lights, he retrieved a small box from his pocket. "This isn't a traditional proposal," he began, taking her hands across the intimate table. "We both face medical uncertainties that make long-term promises complicated." Opening the box revealed not an engagement ring, but an antique silver key on a simple chain. "This is the original key to Tidewater Haven, my family's Chesapeake home," Nathaniel explained, his voice steady, despite the emotion visible in his eyes. "The place where we first truly opened up to each other during the storm." Placing the key in her palm, he continued, "I can't promise you decades with certainty, Lila. My heart condition and your pre-leukemic state make fools of anyone claiming to predict our future. But I can promise that whatever time we have, whether years or decades, we'll build a home together, metaphorically and literally, a place where we face everything honestly, where we keep no secrets, where we support each other through whatever comes. Tears traced silent paths down Lila's cheeks as she closed her fingers around the precious symbol. The most beautiful proposal is one grounded in truth, she whispered. I don't need false guarantees of forever. I need exactly what you're offering. Partnership, through whatever terrain lies ahead. Their kiss, witnessed only by their discreet server and the eternal city surrounding them, sealed a commitment more profound than a traditional engagement. They would face whatever medical challenges emerged, supporting each other through treatment protocols and recovery periods, celebrating remissions and managing setbacks as they came. As the boat completed its circuit of Paris, returning to the dock where they'd embarked, Nathaniel held Lila close against the December chill. Whatever happens, he promised against her hair, this moment is ours completely. No illness can diminish what we've built. Her arms tightened around his waist, her head resting against his chest, where she could hear the steady, if slightly irregular, beating of his heart. No matter what comes next, she agreed, we'll face it without fear because we'll face it together. Chapter 10. Beneath the surface. On the eve of Nathaniel's cardiac procedure at Johns Hopkins, snow blanketed Washington in pristine white, muffling the city's usual urgency. From his hospital room overlooking the illuminated dome of the National Cathedral, Nathaniel watched fat flakes swirl against the darkness, each briefly visible in the building's spotlights, before disappearing into the gathering accumulation below. Lila sat in the recliner beside his bed, ostensibly reading medical literature, but frequently glancing toward him with carefully masked concern. The experimental protocol they'd selected, a targeted ablation to address his heart's abnormal rhythm, carried reasonable risks, but promised significant improvement if successful. You should go back to the hotel, he suggested, noting the shadows beneath her eyes. The procedure isn't until morning. No sense in both of us missing sleep. I'd rather be here, she replied simply, setting aside her tablet. Besides, I sleep better near you, even in uncomfortable hospital chairs. The truth behind her preference remained unspoken, her lingering fear that something might go wrong during the night, that she might miss precious final hours if the worst occurred. Despite encouraging statistics and expert assurances, they both recognized the procedure's inherent risks. Moving to sit beside him on the narrow bed, Lila curled against his side, her head resting on his chest where his heart beat the very rhythm doctors would attempt to normalize tomorrow, provided reassuring continuity beneath her ear. I have something for you, Nathaniel said after a comfortable silence had stretched between them. From the drawer of his bedside table, he extracted an envelope sealed and addressed to her in his precise handwriting. Lila stared at it with immediate understanding and refusal. No, she said firmly, pushing it back toward him. I don't need last letters or final sentiments. It's not that, he assured her, though they both recognized the partial lie. It's everything I haven't managed to express adequately. Things you deserve to hear, in my own words, without my usual editing and restraint. Her reluctance remained visible. You'll read it to me yourself, she insisted, eyes bright with unshed tears. Tomorrow, after the procedure, when you're groggy from anesthesia and can't filter your emotions so carefully. Nathaniel smiled at her transparent strategy. Deal, he agreed, returning the envelope to the drawer. Though I warn you, post-anesthesia confessions might be more revealing than either of us anticipates. They stayed awake long past midnight, speaking of ordinary futures they hoped to share, renovating the Chesapeake house together, sailing along the Adriatic coast, creating holiday traditions that merged their separate histories into shared customs. The mundane aspects of anticipated togetherness felt suddenly precious, worth articulating explicitly while they still could. When Lila finally drifted to sleep against him, Nathaniel remained awake, memorizing the weight of her against his side, the pattern of her breathing, the subtle jasmine scent of her hair. If these were to be his final conscious hours, a possibility medical statistics rendered unlikely but not impossible, he wanted them filled with appreciation rather than fear. Dawn arrived with hospital routine, nurses checking vital signs, doctors reviewing procedure details, anesthesiologists explaining what to expect. Throughout the preparations, Lila maintained calm composure, asking insightful questions while holding Nathaniel's hand in both of hers. As orderlies arrived to transport him to the procedure room, Nathaniel pulled her close for one final moment of privacy. Remember what matters, he whispered against her ear. No matter what happens today, finding you was the best decision of my life. Her smile remained steady, despite the fear visible only to someone who knew her completely. I'll see you soon, she promised, releasing him with visible effort. Don't forget you have a letter to read me. The procedure lasted longer than initially estimated. 4 hours stretching towards 6, As surgeons carefully mapped and treated the problematic heart tissue, in the waiting room, Lila maintained outward composure while anxiety churned beneath. When her phone rang midway through his surgery, she answered automatically, expecting an update from the surgical liaison. Instead, her oncologist's voice came through the line. "Lila, I have your latest results. Do you have a moment to talk?" The irony of receiving her own medical news while waiting for Nathaniel's procedure to conclude wasn't lost on her. "Go ahead," she said, stepping into a private alcove. "I'm at Hopkins with Nathaniel, but I can talk." The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes, yet its content altered everything. Disconnecting the call, Lila stood motionless, absorbing implications that seemed simultaneously miraculous and terrifying. Before she could fully process what she'd learned, Nathaniel's surgeon appeared in surgical scrubs, his expression unreadable behind his mask. "The procedure went well," he announced, removing his surgical cap. "We identified and addressed the primary arrhythmia sources. He's in recovery now and should regain consciousness within the hour." Relief coursed through her, temporarily displacing her own medical news. "When can I see him?" "They'll bring him back to his room shortly. The nurse will come get you." True to prediction, Nathaniel regained consciousness gradually, awareness returning in slow increments as anesthesia released its hold. Through heavy eyelids, he first registered the familiar hospital ceiling, then the rhythmic beeping of monitors recording his newly regularized heartbeat. Finally, turning his head slightly, he found Lila beside his bed, her expression both tender and somehow transformed since he'd last seen her. "You're here," he managed through dry lips. "Always," she confirmed, offering water through a straw. "The procedure was successful. They addressed all the problematic tissue areas. Your prognosis is excellent." As his awareness sharpened, Nathaniel noted something in her demeanor, beyond relief at his successful surgery. A contained energy, a secret knowledge visible in her eyes. "What is it?" he asked, reaching for her hand. "Something happened while I was under." She smiled, still amazed at how completely he could read her. "I received a call from Dr. Patel during your procedure. My latest bone marrow biopsy and genetic testing results came back." Fear immediately clutched at him. "Has the pre-leukemic state progressed?" "The opposite," she said, squeezing his fingers. "The abnormal cells have decreased significantly. My body is responding to the preventative protocol better than they anticipated." She's cautiously optimistic about long-term remission. Joy at her improved prognosis briefly overwhelmed his post-surgical discomfort. "That's wonderful news," he said, pulling her closer despite the monitors attached to his chest. "Both of us healing simultaneously." "There's more," she continued, her voice softening to a near whisper. "The comprehensive testing revealed something unexpected." She paused, seeming to gather courage before continuing. "I'm pregnant, Nathaniel." The few monitors beside his bed registered his shock as his heart rate jumped sharply. "That's impossible," he whispered. "The doctors said your childhood treatments made conception virtually impossible." "Virtually impossible, not completely impossible," she corrected, her own amazement evident. "It's very early. About 6 weeks, Doctor Patel says it's incredibly rare but not unprecedented for childhood cancer survivors. They'll monitor carefully because of my medical history, but so far, everything appears completely normal." Nathaniel struggled to process this extraordinary development while still emerging from anesthesia. "A baby," he repeated, the concept simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. "Our baby," Lila nodded, tears finally spilling over. "Life found a way," she whispered, the simple phrase carrying all their shared wonder. Their embrace was complicated by medical equipment, monitors protesting their entanglement. A nurse appeared briefly to check his vital signs, smiling at their obvious emotional state before tactfully withdrawing to give them privacy. The letter, Nathaniel remembered suddenly. "I promised to read it to you." With Lila's assistance, he retrieved the envelope from the bedside drawer, breaking the seal with trembling fingers. The medication and emotional overload made his voice unsteady as he began reading words written the previous night. "My dearest Lila," he read, "if you're reading this yourself, I've broken my promise to share these words directly. Forgive me that final failure. Know that loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life, not despite our challenges, but because of how beautifully we faced them together." His voice faltered as emotion overwhelmed careful phrasing. Setting aside the letter, he reached for her instead. "I can't read this now," he admitted. "Everything I wrote last night presumed a different future than the one we just discovered." Lila smiled through her tears, understanding completely. "Then write me a new letter," she suggested, "one that includes our child." The monitors surrounding them continued their reassuring rhythms, documenting Nathaniel's strengthening heartbeat, matching the secret new life growing within Lila, a future neither had dared imagine now unfolding through improbable medical developments and the power of their connection. "Whatever comes next," Nathaniel promised, his hand resting gently over the place where their child grew. "We'll navigate it together." "All three of us," Lila covered his hand with hers, completing the circle. "That's all I've ever wanted," she whispered. "Not guaranteed outcomes, but guaranteed partnership through whatever life brings." Outside the hospital windows, snow continued falling on Washington, covering the city's complex history and power structures beneath pristine white. Within their private room, two people who had begun as strangers sharing one passionate night now contemplated a future neither had believed possible just hours earlier. The silver key to Tidewater Haven gleamed on its chain around Lila's neck, catching hospital light. A symbol of their commitment to build a home together not just of wood and stone, but of honesty and mutual support. Their heartbeats synchronized naturally, as they had from their very first encounter, but now, a third tiny heartbeat existed too. Physical proof of possibility emerging from what doctors had deemed impossible. "I love you," Nathaniel whispered against Lila's hair as she rested her head carefully against his healing heart. "Both of you. We love you too," she murmured, one hand resting protectively over her abdomen, where their miracle grew despite medical impossibilities. Together, they had discovered what existed beneath the surface of their carefully constructed defenses. A capacity for love, trust, and growth neither had believed possible, and now, a future bright with promise. Despite the uncertainties that remained,